In this video, we're going to be going over some tips and some kind of PvE guidelines for new and returning players in New World. I've seen the question floating around quite a lot recently from newer players, and that is, how do I get involved with mutations? What do I need to really get started to begin to run mutations and to start doing some of the in-game PvE activities in the game? So in this video, we're going to go over what those things are, what you need, and just some general tips for you guys to help you get started running mutations in New World. So when you're engaging in PvE in New World, primarily in expeditions, there's going to be several different factors of gameplay you're going to need to consider. So each mob in New World belongs to a family of mob, and each family of mob has specific weaknesses to a specific damage type. There's also consumables you can utilize to help enhance your damage output and resistances to various types of mobs. So when you reach end game, you're going to want to also consider the types of perks you're running on your gear for optimal resistances and damage output for expeditions. There's also trophies that you can place in your house that's going to enhance your damage output against certain enemy types as well. So whenever you're choosing your PvE build, you're going to want to be cognizant of the mob type you're fighting and the weapon you are utilizing. So there are some just general overall really good PvE builds in the game. We'll go over some more specific builds in the future, but for now, just be aware that certain mobs are weak to certain damage types. So whenever you're damaging a mob, you're going to see an icon show up next to the damage value. If there's small arrows above the icon, it means that the mob is vulnerable to that damage type and your damage output is going to be increased. So in this case, the damage text is yellow in the game. If the damage text is white, it means you're dealing neutral damage to the enemy. And if the damage type is orange, it means you landed a critical hit on your target. So bear in mind, whenever you are behind a target, you are going to have a 100% critical hit chance. So whenever you're in PvE as a DPS, you should always try to position yourself behind your target for maximum damage output. This is also going to synergize well with some of the perks you're going to put on your weapons. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. But positioning is very important whenever you're in PvE. As a DPS, you're going to want to make sure you're behind your target and always trying to hit them in the back. So if we take a look at this chart here, we're going to see the damage effectiveness against each type of mob family in New World. So Ancients are weak to Strike, Void, and Lightning. Corrupted is weak to Thrust damage, Nature damage, and Arcane. Angry Earth is weak to Slash and Fire. Lost is weak to Strike, Ice, and Nature. Varangians are weak to Slash, and Beasts are weak to Thrust. Also, choosing the correct gem to slot in your weapon is also going to greatly enhance your damage or the way you maintain aggro and your healing and all types of things in PvE. So as a DPS, you're going to want to utilize either a diamond or an opal in your weapon. These are going to be best in slot in all weapons and all expeditions, but there is an exception to this rule. The benefit of either the opal or the diamond really need to have an uptime of roughly 50% in order for them to be best in slot. So if you can't maintain that uptime, then switching to an elemental gem that matches the weakness of that mob type would probably be the better option. So if you slot a diamond, it's going to give you +% damage and damage-based healing while at full health. And opal is going to give you +% damage while your stamina is not full. So my recommendation is that if you are in a pug group, just slot an opal into your weapon, and that's going to be your best bet as a DPS. Diamonds are great if you're in a coordinated group that can keep you topped off all the time, and depending upon the certain encounters, diamonds can be excellent as well. But I personally prefer opals because I have direct control over how much I can dodge and the uptime that I have on the opal. And if you are tanking, you definitely need to use cut pristine carnelian gems in both of your weapons. That is very important. Your taunts are not going to work unless you have carnelians in your weapons. So if you are tanking, it is very important. Those are the gems you should be using. And then if you're healing, you're really going to want to utilize a cut pristine diamond in your life staff, and then utilize the DPS guidelines that we just talked about for your back bar weapon. And if you're wanting to go the rune glass route for PvE, it's really only recommended that you do this with a coordinated team. They are going to increase your DPS, but each of these can only be applied once per mob, so stacking them is going to be really a loss in DPS. So if you're in a coordinated group, you're going to need to coordinate the type of rune glass everyone is running so that you're not stacking those damage types. But again, if you're running rune glass, it's only recommended if you're in a coordinated group. If you're running pugs, or if you're not trying to speed run, or if you're not very coordinated or just learning, it's highly recommended you just use the other gems we just talked about. And then whenever you're running mutations, you're going to need to be aware of the mutated version of the expedition. This is going to change the gem that you slot in your armor. So your armor gems when running the mutated version should be cut pristine elemental gems for whatever mutation you're running. So you're going to be running amethyst for void mutations, ruby for fire, amber for nature, and aquamarine for ice. This is going to greatly increase your survivability whenever you're running these expeditions, especially when you bump on up into the higher tier expeditions like the M2s and M3s. Running these in your gear is going to be pretty essential whenever you're doing those expeditions. It's going to greatly increase your survivability, allow you to bump your constitution down quite a lot so that you can then pump out more damage as a DPS, or just simply have more survivability as a tank so that you can stay alive for your team. You should also be aware of the status effects in the game whenever you are participating in PvE. This also goes for PvP as well, but this video we're talking about PvE. So whenever you're putting together your build, just be cognizant of the status effects that you're going to be utilizing whenever you're in the expedition. This can provide a lot of utility for your team. So the most important debuff really that you can apply to your target is Rend. So Rend's going to reduce the amount of damage absorption your target has, and it has a cap of 70%. So whenever you stack max stacks of Rends on your target, you can kill them a whole lot quicker. But it's very important to note that with Season 3, bosses and mutator level 2 and level 3 expeditions have what's called debuff resilience. So the effectiveness of your individual Rend and weakened status effects are going to be reduced by 50% and 75% respectively, but those debuff caps are not going to be affected. So you can still get to the cap of 70% Rend and 50% weaken, but your individual effect is going to be debuffed based on that debuff resilience. So it's going to take a whole lot more people stacking those in order to reach cap. But just be aware of those status effects and all of the other status effects. I have them listed here on the screen, and I'll make sure to list this guide down in the description below so you can reference this. It has all of the buffs, all the debuffs, all of the damage over time effects. You can familiarize yourself with those. And consumables are also going to be a very important part to your success in expeditions. So in order to maximize your efficiency and damage output in an expedition, there's going to be several consumables you should be utilizing. They consist of food, coatings, honing stones, bombs, dust, and potions. So the most important consumables are attribute food, coatings, ward potions, and honing stones. The remaining consumables are pretty useful to have, but they're not necessarily required. There are different tiers of each item, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to be outlining the most powerful of each tier because we are talking about in-game. So infused coatings is really a must-have as a DPS. This is something you're going to want to have. It increases your damage by 15% to specific mob types. There are coatings for every mob type in the game. So there are coatings for lost enemies, Varangians, beasts, etc. If you apply one of these coatings, it lasts for 40 minutes, but bear in mind you have to apply a coating to both of your weapons. Applying a coating to one weapon does not apply to the other one. And if you unequip or just remove your weapon entirely and replace it with another weapon, your coating will go away. If you leave the expedition and come back in, your coating also goes away, so you're going to need to reapply it in that situation as well. You also have powerful honing stones that are going to increase your weapon damage by 7%. Unlike the coatings, you only need to consume one powerful honing stone. This is going to apply that to your character for 40 minutes, regardless of which weapon you have equipped. You can switch back and forth between them freely. So infused coatings, you'll need to apply 2. Honing stones, you only need to apply this once. Your attribute food is going to increase your attribute or combination of attributes by 40, and this is going to last 40 minutes. We then have the last item on the list here called infused ward potions. There's one for each mob type, just like there are for coatings, and this is going to give you plus 10% damage absorption from specific mob types. This lasts for 40 minutes. It's highly recommended that you pop one of these as well before the expedition starts, because this is going to greatly increase your survivability throughout the duration of the expedition. Then the powerful incense, gemstone dust, and oak flesh balm. Those things are optional. They can help you out in situations, so those would be handy to have on hand. But again, they're not necessarily required. And then in addition to all the consumables that we just listed, you can also obtain trophies for your houses. You can obtain trophies for each different type of mob, and the trophies can be minor, basic, or major. You can have a combination of any of the three. So for example, you can have a minor in one home, a basic in one home, and a major in another home. And each of the trophy increases your damage to that specific mob type by a percentage. So minor trophies increase your damage to a mob type by 3%, basic by 4%, and major by 5%. So getting major trophies can be fairly expensive, but getting a minor and a basic is pretty cheap and pretty easy to do. So it's highly recommended that you at least have 3 houses, and you should be putting 3 basic trophies for a specific mob type in each of those houses. That would increase your damage to that mob type by 12%. It's a pretty big boost in damage. So getting your trophies is very important. That's one of the main reasons you're going to want to own a house in New World, is so that you can get the combat trophy buffs, and there's some other trophy buffs as well. I will link a complete trophy guide down in the description below if you want to check that out. Click on that and that'll give you a ton more information about trophies. But just know these are there. You can obtain basics pretty easily, and you should 100% be utilizing these whenever you start running mutated expeditions. And then for gear perks, whenever you're setting up your PvE build, you're most definitely going to want to shoot for specific perks on your gear. So bear in mind that the best in slot items are often subjective and pretty situational, but there are some undisputed perks that you're going to want to have in order to maximize your efficiency in expeditions. So perks in your armor are pretty straightforward and really should consist of the following: health, enchanted ward, and a skill perk when necessary. I like enchanted ward. I think that's going to be an excellent perk to have on your gear for season 3. If you're not aware of what enchanted ward is, it's a perk that's just going to decrease the damage you take from light and heavy attacks by 4%. So whenever you stack this on all of your armor, it's going to decrease the damage you take from light and heavy attacks by a pretty decent percentage. Some other runner-up perks are going to consist of vigor, invigorated, elemental aversion, and physical aversion. All of those would be fine as well, but in my opinion, health, enchanted ward, and then the skill perk on your gear whenever necessary. And then if you don't need a skill perk, you could put refreshing on there in place of the skill perk. And then for your weapons, some great options as a DPS to throw on your weapons would be rogue and vicious, keenly empowered, thwarting strikes, keenly jagged, mortal power, attunement, and life stealing. Vicious did get nerfed pretty hard with this patch, but I still think it's going to be a fine perk to put on your gear. Rogue is a whole lot better whenever talking about sheer damage, but you have to land backstab damage in order to proc Rogue. But if you are positioning yourself appropriately, you should be landing backstab damage most of the time anyway. But those are just some general perks to look out for whenever you're putting together your PvE build. And once again, we will have some specific builds coming up on the channel very soon. That's going to go into a little bit more in depth about why we chose certain perks to put on the weapons whenever we go over those builds. But that's going to do it for this one, boys and girls. That was just some general tips or guidelines for some new and returning players for mutations, or for just really any general PvE in New World. I hope you guys found this guide helpful. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate that. And of course, we stream over on Twitch every Monday at 8 o'clock a.m. CST, every Friday, 8 o'clock a.m. CST. Typically do a little bit of a weekend stream over there as well. It's at twitch.tv/BDLG. I'd love to see you come hang out over there. We have a great time. That's going to do it for this one, boys and girls. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I greatly appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one.